You've got to get up pretty early in the morning to speak to America's hardworking farmers and food producers. We should know. FLM Harvest is a strategic, full-service creative consultancy proud to reach more farmers, farmer boards, and food and commodity associations than any agency in the country. And we understand omni-channel as well as we understand the journey from field to fork. Most importantly, we connect clients to the audiences that matter to them.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And to be honest with you, the week that was is going to kind of continue to develop into the week that will be in the next couple of days, because one of the major developments that we're tracking at Agri-Pulse this week is continued negotiations between the administration and the House of Representatives over the U.S Mexico-Canada Agreement, the update to the North American Free Trade Agreement. We heard from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this week saying that House Democrats want to pass this bill. That's language a little bit further than she's been willing to go previously, but we do know that a working group of House Democrats met with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer earlier this week to discuss out and kind of hash out where House Democrats are at and where the administration is willing to go. And Phil, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit more optimistic tone from the speaker that we heard here today than we've heard previously, and wondering how you think that bodes for consideration of this deal on Capitol Hill.
Well, and it certainly fits with what we're hearing from a U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer, and also from members on both sides of the Hill. And it's based in the fact that the Speaker Pelosi has appointed this small task force, 8 members plus Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal, to work on the specific issues that Democrats have, work on ways to address those concerns, whether it's going to be through a side agreement or side agreements, or exactly what form this is going to take, we don't know. But Lighthizer has been pretty clear that he wants to work with Democrats to find solutions. And again, as you mentioned, they had a meeting on Tuesday with the Democrats, apparently also talked with the Democratic caucus. So we're certainly seeing, it could take a while. Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat from Oregon who chairs the Trade Subcommittee, made it sound like they might be meeting once a week, hopefully with Lighthizer. So it's going to take some time. We're looking at the fall or toward certainly later in the year before this agreement goes through.
Because House Democrats have been asking for really what amounts to structural changes within the agreements that would inevitably lead to, they hope, reopening the agreement, making the changes, closing it right back up, and coming right back to Capitol Hill. Obviously, the administration would prefer the side letter route for ease of function purposes. Yeah,
and it's a little unclear. I mean, Democrats have they've talked about changing the agreement, but then there have been other suggestions as well over in the Senate. 2 influential senators over there, Ron Wyden, who's the top Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, and another senior Democrat on that committee, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, have talked about addressing the issue of labor standards through a side agreement that would involve largely steps that the United States would take to make sure that Mexico upholds its end of the agreement in terms of labor standards and enforces its laws. So we'll see. It's very fuzzy. We don't exactly how this will play out. But it should take weeks before we know for sure.
Elsewhere on the trade front, also some things worth mentioning. President Donald Trump in Japan today, really for the rest of the week at the G20 summit. Among the folks that he plans to meet with is Chinese President Xi Jinping. Obviously, a lot of folks within the ag sector hoping that a meeting between the 2 presidents will lead to some kind of a break in the logjam that these trade negotiations have become. There was progress, early on in the year, and then all of a sudden things just kind of stopped in May. A lot of folks really hoping that this G20 summit can get the talks moving again, potentially towards some kind of resolution.
Right, and hanging over this is the president threatening to increase tariffs, basically expand them to the Section 301 tariffs to just about everything else that the United States imports from China, including herbicides, starting possibly as soon as next week. $300 million worth of imports. That's hanging over this. Now, the assumption is that maybe if they get an agreement in Japan to get these talks going again, that maybe that the president holds back on those particular tariffs. But we'll have to see. That's what we will be watching for this weekend.
Another potential meeting that could happen at the G20 is between Lighthizer and his Japanese counterpart, potentially looking to get moving on a bilateral deal between the United States and Japan. So no shortage of ag trade news to follow these days. We'll be sure to keep you up to date on what we're hearing on those subjects.
And a lot of optimism we've been hearing in the last few days about a deal on agricultural issues with Japan. Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue talking about that just this week. Chuck Grassley, the Senate Finance Chairman, has said he expects something shortly after the elections in Japan in July. So we're talking something sooner rather than later. Some kind of an announcement in terms of a deal with July, with Japan, which would be welcomed by a lot in the ag sector, certainly in beef and pork sectors.
Of course. Bringing things back to Capitol Hill here for a brief moment, I want to talk about something that happened earlier this week in the House of Representatives, where House Democrats were able to pass a appropriations measure, contained a number of bills within it, including something that would fund a number of agencies critical to agriculture, including USDA, EPA, FDA, and the Department of Interior. But at this point, what we're seeing is largely messaging and symbolic votes from the House of Representatives, because, Phil, here we sit almost to the month of July. Fiscal year ends at the end of September, and this is all happening against the backdrop of, there's no spending deal or no budget caps reached, really not a ton of negotiation or not a ton of action between Congress and the administration on funding the government in FY20 at this point.
Yeah, the Democrats in the House moved forward with all the appropriations bills, set their own numbers in terms of what they wanted to spend, both top line numbers and numbers within, for example, within USDA on research and so forth. Basically what they've done is set their priorities and kind of their wish list. We can kind of look at it this way. But there is no agreement with the Senate and with the White House on what the top line spending levels should be for the new fiscal year, which starts in October, fiscal 2020. So until you get that kind of agreement, these numbers are, mostly wishful thinking. But the Senate hasn't even started on writing its appropriations bills. So we're up against a new fiscal year, and they've barely gotten started.
Some of the messaging that House Democrats did within that bill, increasing rural broadband spending, voting to block the relocation of ERS and NEFA to Kansas City. So there are some stakes in the ground being drawn, right. But here we are, last week of June. House and Senate will be in July, taking the
right.
Familiar August recess, one would assume. I mean, last year they did away with it. I mean, they could potentially do that again, but I don't think anyone is jumping for joy at that possibility right now. Right now, as things sit, there is July and September on the congressional calendar, essentially 2 months to fund the government for another fiscal year.
Yeah, and they're always September is always a fairly short month, so there is not that much time left, and they're going to have to get some agreement. There's simply no way that these appropriations bills will be agreed on before September 30th. We also have a debt ceiling issue to deal with. Congress hasn't dealt with that either. So we'll see. They have made some progress again here in the House, none at all in the Senate. We're a long way from funding the government for 2020.
And just think, a year ago we were talking about whether or not they were going to be able to pass a farm bill in time. Oh my gosh! What memories we have here on Capitol Hill. They did that. They did. But obviously, a lot of things to continue to follow here at Agri-Pulse.com, from the trade negotiations and conversations around the world, really, to the spending talks and trade talks here on Capitol Hill. We'll be sure to keep you up to date with all of this news and how it impacts ag and food policy here going forward on agripulse.com. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.